it really is about authenticity. You can communicate authentically, but using technology. So maybe a better question is it authentic, or are we being authentic? Then kind of getting into the conversation about, but is it real? And what if people don't think it's real and things like that? But is it authentic? And I think a lot goes into authenticity, and a lot of that is branding and just trust built over time.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast where we talk to HR innovators about all things people leadership. If you're looking for places to find about new ways to think about the world of work, this is the podcast for you. Please subscribe from your favorite podcast listening platform today and leave us a review. Rebel on, HR Rebels. Welcome back, Rebel HR listeners. Extremely excited for the conversation today. I am just regretting that I did not hit record about 15 minutes ago when Natalie and I were first talking. With us today, we have Natalie Monbiot. She is the head of strategy at Hour1, which is an AI video generating platform used in onboarding and L&D. And we are going to dig into all sorts of things related to what they do at Hour1. Welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thanks so much, Kyle.
So I want to expand upon some of the work that you do as the head of strategy at Hour1. So if we could take a step back, give us a little bit of an overview of what Hour1 does and what your role is there.
For sure. So it's all going to sound a little wild, maybe, but maybe not to your Rebel human resource audience. We are actually a virtual human company. And what we do is we create virtual humans that are based on real humans. And we do this with the purpose of enabling better communications and to enable higher productivity for human beings in the workforce. So we have a library of about 150 virtual human characters that can be brought to life and animated just from text. And we enable content to be created in just minutes with the text-based content that you already have. And we also provide, which is very new, immersive 3D environments. So you can create on-brand newsrooms or office spaces or way more imaginative, immersive backgrounds that fit your brand and business. And we'll co-create that with you. We'll cast your virtual human. You can even become one yourself. And then we basically assemble that so that you can log on to our platform. And just by entering text and uploading a few images, you can create these truly immersive 3D videos presented by your virtual HR representative.
It's really fascinating. And as I was preparing for this conversation, I was doing a little bit of research and I was out on the website and looking at it. And I mean, these characters look real. They look like somebody that you would see in some sort of like a training video or like on the news. So, it's really a fascinating approach. I'm curious, is the intent to create an experience, a communicative experience that feels real, and then people pay more attention to it? Is that really kind of the theory of the work here?
Yes, exactly. So the premise of what we do is that talking to a real human is the best way to communicate. In fact, face-to-face communications between two humans or smaller humans is the best way to relate. That said, it's quite rare to be able to get into these situations, especially these days where a lot of communications are digitized. A lot of the ways that we engage are remote and digitized. And we also one-to-one communications don't scale in the way that businesses require, and for the amount of messages and communication that needs to happen. And so what we've done is we're doing our best to model that type of human-led communication and through AI to be able to scale what we think is the best way to communicate and make that accessible to all kinds of people that don't have video production skills, that don't have any coding skills, and that don't have the resources, resources being time or budget, to create these types of human-led video experiences.
It's really interesting because I feel like you just described my organization. It's like, well, I don't have a full learning and development department. I have a few people that help in that arena. I certainly don't have an on-staff videographer. And the best that we've been able to do, we've tried a couple like types of software where it's like, it almost looks like stick figure, like computer animation. And it's like, it's kind of like a cheeky video, and there's, maybe some humor in there, and but it's like intentionally cartoonish. Right. So this to me strikes as maybe a little bit more, more real, and potentially, you'll get people to listen a little bit more seriously. So I'm curious. Go ahead.
Yeah, we actually, because there's avatars. I think avatars are something that's pretty common and prevalent these days. I know that you recently did an episode on the metaverse, and the metaverse is populated by the protagonists being avatars. So I think people are becoming familiar with that notion. We made a decision 3.5 years ago when we launched the company to focus on photoreal virtual humans or avatars, and because emulate the expressiveness of a human being, to basically engage in a way that is more relatable, in a way that you would engage with another human being. And we model the expressiveness of real humans in our avatars. And we think that is a more powerful and personable and kind of friendly and professional way to communicate versus kind of these more cartoonish avatars. That's where we're placing our bets.
It's really interesting. And it brings me back to the conversations that I have and have had over the length of my career, where somebody has a feeling that they can trust what somebody says or not trust what somebody says based upon their interaction, their nonverbals. I've had this conversation a number of times where somebody feels like, I just don't trust what they told me. And then I tell them the exact same thing. They're like, oh, that makes sense. It's like, I'm telling you the same thing. But I'm telling it to you in person. I'm telling it to you in a way that you can understand how and why and that sort of thing. And so I think about that in the context of scalability. If you can make it, personal, if you can have the copy correct, and have kind of the right message that you want to send, but then just send it in the way that a person can interpret it correctly, could be a really powerful tool. Am I onto something there?
You certainly are. So that's exactly right. We're taking information which is primarily text-based. So there's an endless amount of text in the world, and particularly in the world of business. And this text often really gets overlooked. It doesn't get...
No. You read that entire handbook before you signed off on it. I know you did, Natalie. Don't tell me.
And we know that people, I think there's a stat, it's people digest the meaning of text at sort of 10% compared with video, which is like 90%. So we know that messages can be transmitted more effectively in video. So we've chosen video as our medium, and we've chosen to make video really easy to make and bypass that whole process of being in a studio, having to, have a videographer on hand, having to have kind of all the crew on location at the same time, and then kind of, not just do that initial capture, but then also do the editing. We started with really the virtual human aspect to basically remove friction in creating presenter-led video. But what we also found along the journey to where we are today is that video editing, once you've got someone talking on a green screen, actually integrating the content, integrating the backgrounds, making the video look finished and polished and professional is actually almost just as challenging. And you again need video editors and a creative team to put that together. So the other thing that we've done is we've now launched recently, as I touched on earlier, these 3D immersive environments that actually have different shots that would make up a total edited professional video, and you're able to just select them from within the platform. So you can select close-ups, you can select pan shots, you can select from a bunch of different sort of scenes and compose your video yourself without any of these skills.
Very cool. Very cool. So we could take this, we could break the fourth wall here. Like I could take the transcript from this podcast, I could put that into hour one, and then I wouldn't have to do any sort of video editing, and I could have video without having to do video editing. My understanding.
That is very true. In fact, that that YouTube channel that you said that you didn't have before,
I don't have a YouTube
you could
channel.
now have that.
There you go. You know what? I'm gonna write that down, and that could be kind of fun.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, along those lines, if we want to just finish that idea just a little bit, one of the things that you're able to do when you make content using code versus cameras is that you're able to edit that content endlessly. So if you need to update the text, or you wanted to even translate the whole video into a different language with the same virtual human as the base of it, you can do that. So there's this kind of ultimate sort of flexibility. Then there's things that you can do where you're basically changing elements of what that human being can deliver. So you're kind of breaking it down into different components. The voice, you can select your ideal voice, you can select your ideal languages, you can select your ideal personas, and you can kind of assemble your perfect representative, essentially, for your business. So again, that kind of gets into sort of really kind of like interesting kind of out there territory, but we're already there in many ways. We've been doing Photoshop for a couple of decades, I'm sure, at this point. Instagram filters and filtering apps are kind of the default these days. And this is almost taking it to just evolving that in the kind of professional world to in a way that is designed to help you make really polished videos that look really good without actually having the manpower to do it. I would say the old school way, the analog way, and now with these digital tools, you're able to kind of achieve that result, or even a slightly more enhanced result automatically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It reminds me of a number of years ago, I was trying to find a low cost way to do some compliance training, some sexual harassment and kind of policy training, and I had a PowerPoint. We're HR people, love our PowerPoints, and I thought, well, I'm just gonna I'll just go onto some sort of recording software. I'll just record myself speaking over the PowerPoint, and I'll flip to the PowerPoint. I just need to I can do this. I present all the time. This is going to be perfectly fine. And the amount of time it took me to go through, because I kept screwing up, and it was and then I couldn't really I didn't have the editing capability to go back and cut it and reduce it and move it. And I ended up the result of that project was I'm just going to go buy something off the shelf. But the problem with that is if you buy something off the shelf, it is impersonal. It's not specific to your organization, and it might not even really have the message that you feel like needs to be sent. It's going to check a box, right? And so as I think about this, it's almost, for me, it's a nice in between where you do have something where you need to make sure the communication gets sent. Maybe it's a compliance message, maybe it's a policy, maybe it's just some sort of a communication or update on something related to the business. And you don't have time to do this on an individual level. It's kind of in the middle. That's kind of how I see this. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. So actually, interesting that you raised the point about trying to film yourself presenting a PowerPoint. Sounds easy enough.
There's a reason I don't have a YouTube channel, Natalie. Let's just put that one.
Yes. And also, just when you're recording yourself, there's just this kind of self-consciousness that you don't have when you're talking live. It's a weird thing. But because of that, and you're not the only person to have kind of suffered that, and it's not just that it's uncomfortable and the result isn't what you wanted. You spent time basically reading a script, which you don't need a human brain and to be able to do. And so what we look to do is where are you spending your time as a professional where you don't need to be spending your time? Where could you be coming up with the content for that PowerPoint, the ideas for that PowerPoint, and then just have your virtual twin or another avatar narrate that for you? And they're all polished. They've been captured in really good lighting and makeup as relevant and all of that. So they're ready to go. And we actually recently launched a feature specifically for PowerPoint presentations. So you can upload your PowerPoint deck and easily format it to a recording with an avatar essentially narrating the deck for you. So you're not the only one in that position.
Fascinating. I'm just thinking, yeah, it, for an organization like mine where we don't have a full-time kind of professional training person, that it just seems like this could be a really interesting, next step, or even if it's just supplemental, so that you're not the one that has to do all of the orientation presentation. Maybe you do it for 4 hours, and then you have 4 hours of on-demand videos that your new inductees have to watch, right? You could structure a lot of different ways.
Exactly. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Is like, how do you create a library of on-demand content that is high quality and that is designed to be revisited a lot and is almost made for on-demand? Because it's actually, our attention spans for watching on-demand, consuming on-demand video are shorter than even a live video experience. So we also aim to condense the information into as much as possible and to make it as visual and rich as possible. And also, when you're writing a script versus talking, ad lib, you don't say the ums and the likes and the whatever it is. So actually, it is more concise, and it's designed to be consumed on demand. And I think that is a great way to look at it. And I'll go back to my original point, which is that human face-to-face communication is still the best way to communicate, and it's what we model our technology and our product on. This is, where this comes in is not to replace you communicating, but it's to be able to take on some of the heavy lifting and generate more content, which is in the end easy to make and also very easy and hopefully enjoyable to consume.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Absolutely. It's one of the things I want to talk about, it's interesting. So, and for anybody that's interested, we'll have a link in the show notes. You can pop it open, you can check it out and see what we're talking about. But, the characters that you can choose from. So there's over 100 characters, and I thought it was pretty telling that you've got a really diverse slate of characters. And the first thing that I thought is, that allows you to actually lean into our implicit biases a little bit and kind of use the halo effect for your own purposes. It's almost like it's like leaning in a little bit. So as you're like building out like what these avatars look like, and you're building these options, was that something that you considered, kind of the diversity element of the trainer, the avatar?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we want to be and strive to be is really representative in the virtual humans that we provide. And that we want to be representative of the population. We want to be representative of the workforce. And so that's one thing. And then we also want to be able to provide, again, this is something that can be tricky for an organization of, various sizes, is finding the right combination and variation of representatives who are diverse in total. So we also aim to provide a large library, and always building on this library of avatars that represent different ages, different ethnicities, different genders. And that is something that we've got another 50 avatars which will be coming out in the near future, and we're continuing to push the envelope in that direction.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It reminds me of we've done some leadership training recently, and we have a large large portion of our workforce in Southeast Asia. And when we went through the training, we had some talk about like business leaders. And so instead of having like, Jeff Bezos, we had like Jack Ma, right? And it's like, and we made sure that the pictures were, kind of culturally appropriate and would resonate with the folks in that geographic, part of the world. So it's really interesting that, you can customize in that way. And my assumption is, going back to what you said about code versus cameras, you do have a little bit more flexibility to customize as many times as you need to, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's a really important point about being able to localize your content, localize your learning materials, both in terms of the presenter, but then also the imagery that you're using and the examples that you're pulling in, either in the voice, in the narrative, or as visual examples and representation. And then also the language component. So yeah, in China, you could be delivering in Mandarin with the same avatar or a different avatar, or you could even let people pick their avatar. I mean, there's many kinds of permutations. And then you can also keep your content fresh, because let's say, you've got some training content and it references something that happened this year, and, a year has passed and that reference isn't the best reference, or that reference is no longer a viable reference. And so you have the flexibility to keep your content fresh without having to kind of go through the entire process of starting again. What I should say, though, and add, is that we are not replacing people in many senses. First of all, human face-to-face communication, as much of that is possible, should happen. And then also, in another respect, we're very human first, in that all of our avatars, all of our virtual humans, are based on real people. And we have this really interesting business model. We're kind of building a new kind of economy here, where everyday people, some of them, might be actors in their real lives, or they're not. But all kinds of people just interested in this as a side hustle. And they sign an agreement with Hour One, and they essentially make their likeness, make their virtual self available for hire by brands who are the clients, the customers of Hour One. So there's this really interesting kind of new economy building where you can earn a passive income kind of as a virtual human, which is a sentence you probably wouldn't have expected to hear a couple of years ago. But this is something that I personally find really fascinating. And we're actually really starting to see that pick up, not just in kind of our everyday 100 plus library of kind of virtual humans, but we also have now kind of influencers who are really interested in this space and thinking about how they can scale their presence. And if you're an influencer, your presence is really important. How can you start scaling that through their virtual twin? So again, like you, the influencer, you in person, that's like the number one prized experience. But, there's a long tail of exposure and engagement that, others might be interested in. So in fact, just just very recently, we have a futurist called Ian Beecraft, and his virtual twin is actually delivering on a weekly basis the futurist reports for a news company called Defiance Media. As it's pretty wild, but that's pretty
on the nose there. The futurist is using futuristic technology to deliver the futurist
exactly
projections.
It's kind of matching luggage kind of situation.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So what does that look like? So I have to fill out like a visual resume to like start to make money off of my virtual AI likeness. That is such a super cool sub economy kind of a thing.
Yeah, and it's phenomenal how many people have signed up to be one of these virtual humans. So and now we're kind of getting going on enabling it at scale in a big way.
It's really fascinating. I actually think, and we talk about kind of, innovation in this space, innovation in the HR space. There's so many different ways that you could leverage this, but we have to think a little bit differently about what human resources is. And I think about this as like, for me, like you said, the face-to-face stuff, you can't get rid of it, right? Like if I have to do some conflict management or mediation between two employees, I'm not going to have an AI, bot come in and be like, I feel like you are upset. Tell me about it. You know what I mean? Like you have to do that yourself.
Yeah.
But if I am delivering, compliance training, or I'm helping an employee with a black and white, like maybe there's an issue with getting logged into the system, or there's a question about time off, or there's a question about pay or benefits or handbooks or policies or travel or blah blah blah. Like if you could leverage this tool, as long as you've got the documentation underneath it to support it, and somebody could have something that feels like a human interaction, and you could save yourself a ton of time. Because I know a lot of my day is spent dealing with some of those things that, these are like just small things, and it's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's like, eventually you just don't have enough minutes in the day to help everybody, the same way.
Yeah, that's totally right. It's like, exactly, it's the handbook thing, but reading an entire handbook is just a pretty daunting prospect. But yeah, and so being able to dramatize that, and again, you don't need you to communicate that, but maybe you need to find a better way to surface the information.
Right.
And the best way to surface the information is maybe not you yourself communicating information. So you're basically taking advantage of tools that we as human beings have at our disposal, and the whole, new sets of tools being developed all the time to help you kind of manage that better.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating. And, one of the corollaries that I was drawing, before I hit record was, we're seeing this everywhere. Like, we're seeing this in media and movies, and, they're like digitally rendering people who aren't even alive anymore. And in various, productions. I'm curious, have you received any sort of pushback as you've been, working on this and kind of rolling out this idea? Because it's pretty groundbreaking, I think, to a lot of your target customers. What have you heard there?
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is pretty disruptive. So we expect pushbacks or skepticism, certainly questions about what we're doing and how we're going about doing it. But is it real? How do you know it's real? Or is the fact that the human isn't real, does that matter? And I think it's a really huge question. And it's a very interesting question. I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is build trust. And the building of the trust is to do with, in the case of a company that is leveraging virtual humans, it's more like, okay, so do you trust that company to communicate in a way that is authentic? And does that company want to find ways to communicate with you in a more effective way? Are they being transparent about the ways that they're trying to improve the way they communicate with you? Does the technology actually improve things for everyone concerned? If it doesn't, then the question why is, in bold caps. But if there is clear value, then I think people are actually just appreciative, and that's where adoption comes from. It's like, where are you actually solving problems? And so those are the places that we look for. And we've chosen the world of work to focus on, because we think there is a lot to be done to enable more effective communications. And we work with authenticated companies that are sort of established companies that operate within legitimate verticals. And so, we're trying to kind of work with them to build solutions for better communication. So I think part of, why we work with companies and why we're not a consumer product is that we think this is a really good place to prove value and to build trust. But certainly, always there's, people can be not understand or have their concerns about the way content generation is going. But the fact of the matter is, content generation is becoming more automated. Whether you realize it or not, or whether you acknowledge it or not. So if you're familiar with DALL-E and Midjourney, which are these incredible AI platforms where you can insert words and magically an image, a completely fantastical, brilliant image is rendered based on the words that you input to the platform. I mean, that is, incredible disruption in the way that we create stuff. But at the same time, it's just a new tool. We had the paintbrush, we had pencils, and these are just new tools. And so the idea of, is that real? Yes, it is. It was just generated in a new way, which is pushing the boundaries on what you consider to be real. So I don't know. It's a very interesting sort of space. I would say that the emergence of the metaverse in the last 18 months or so, in peak emergence, has definitely kind of removed a lot of skepticism almost automatically. Everyone just seems to have bought into the fact that there's this kind of interconnected virtual worlds that we're going to be inhabiting, and people have really kind of bought into that concept in quite a wholesale way. And if you can imagine that and you're comfortable with that, then I think that's really kind of, helps to break down like, okay, well, what are the components that are leading to and building towards this metaverse? Part of it is virtual humans. I mean, you can pretty much not have a metaverse without virtual humans to populate them. So very interesting times, I think, where we are with kind of blurriness, but also acceptance in a way of change that we haven't seen for a while.
No, it's fascinating. I love this conversation. We could stay on this for hours, but it's. I think it's a really important point. I think there's a couple of things as you were talking. I think some really great points. The whole question, like, is it real? We always say, perception's reality, right? Especially in the world of HR. It doesn't really matter what happened. It matters what somebody thinks happened. Right? A lot of times. And so, the answer is, is it real? I think the answer is, well, do you think it is? And if you think it is, then it's real to you. And that is kind of, right, wrong, or indifferent. That is kind of the world that we live in now. I also think that, as I think about my employees who are gamers or heavily involved in the virtual world, there could be a generational component there. Having something like this actually could be a signal to them that the organization is innovative and is aware of these things and is open-minded to thinking differently and more effectively about how do we deliver communication content and those sorts of things. And I couldn't agree more. It all comes back to trust. If your actions don't reflect your values, and then it doesn't matter what platform you use to communicate, you're going to struggle. That's just all there is to it.
And that last point is very well said, I think. And it really is about authenticity.
Yeah.
So if you are communicating authentically, then, you can communicate authentically, but using technology. So so maybe a better question is it authentic, or are we being authentic? Mm-hmm. Then, kind of getting into the conversation about, but is it real? And what if people don't think it's real and things like that? But is it authentic? And I think a lot goes into authenticity, and a lot of that is branding and just trust built over time.
Yeah. In that way, you don't have an existential crisis as you're sitting there, racking your brain about this.
Exactly.
I'm going to go and, question my life now, but just absolutely wonderful conversation. I love this approach. I love that you're pushing the boundaries, and I would just encourage, for everybody that's listening out there to just think differently about how you deliver content, and think about the types of things that you want people to have a personal touch, but don't have time to do. I guarantee you there's a lot of those, that could be a potential application. So that being said, we're going to shift gears. We're going to go into the Rebel HR Flash Round. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right. Question number 1. Where does HR need to rebel?
So I say this as a non-HR person and with full humility, but I think in general, and maybe not this audience listening, but against itself. I heard a stat recently that it takes HR 5 to 7 years longer to innovate than other functions. And so, against itself, I would say, for the broad body of HR based on that stat. But it really takes the pioneers, and probably a lot of them are the ones that are listening to this podcast, to drive that change.
Absolutely. 5 to 7 years. That's scary. I don't even I'm trying to think how much was different 5 years ago than today, right? And if we're adapting that slowly, then there's a call to action. So I think that's a really important perspective, especially from outside of HR. I think we need to hear that. So I appreciate you sharing that. All right, question number 2: who should we be listening to?
So to contextualize this for an HR relevant audience, another slightly rebellious podcast in this space is Chat and Cheese. And so if people aren't listening to that, definitely worth checking out, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And we can use all the innovators we can get if we're going to move that needle from 5 to 7 years a little bit faster, right? So appreciate you sharing that. All right, last question. How can our listeners connect with you and learn more?
You can find me on pretty much all the social platforms. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter as Nat Like That. You can certainly visit us at hour1.ai. And you can even try out a free video there if you like. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's immediately after this, I'm going to go create my video and see what my airbrushed avatar looks like. I can't wait. So I'm going to pick a better voice though. I got to figure out what voice I want to pick, but really, really appreciate it. We'll have all that information in the show notes. So open up your podcast player, check it out. I encourage you to take a look. Natalie, I really appreciate you spending some time with us here today. Some really cool stuff. And I appreciate you being on the cutting edge of communication.
Thanks so much, Carl. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.